Finally, the question so many Patriots fans have been asking about the front office. What's it going to look like? Who's running the show? As I've said for weeks, give somebody the GM title. Don't give it to them. I don't really care. Mm-hmm. Patriots haven't employed a GM since 1989. It was Billy Sullivan's son. So this, like, Orthwine didn't have a GM, right? This goes back pre-Kraft. They just they divide those responsibilities up differently. Some other teams do sort of a version of this. It's not totally unheard of, but that's for everybody. Oh, they need a GM. They need a GM. Bill left. Who's going to replace him as the GM? This is the answer to that question.
Yeah,
you can call Eliot Wolf whatever you want, and they'll give him a title eventually. Maybe they've already done it internally. I don't know. Although I think the report was earlier this week that they hadn't. But Eliot Wolf's the one in the room when 5 people want player A and 5 people want player B. Eliot Wolf's the one who gets to say, guys, this is what we're doing.
Yep.
And that's ultimately what it comes down to. Again, you can call him the GM. You can call him the director of football operations. You can call him the king of New England football. You can call him whatever you want. Doesn't matter. He has final say. That was the point. And for people who don't know about Eliot Wolf, yes, his dad is a Hall of Fame NFL executive. Ron Wolf spent a long time with the Green Bay Packers. Eliot Wolf is not some guy who just coasted in off his dad's name and grabbed this job. He has been working in personnel since 2004. He was the director of player personnel for the Packers, the director of football operations for the Packers. He was an assistant general manager for the Cleveland Browns. Like, his resume is built as somebody who should be an NFL general manager. He got interest last year. He didn't end up getting a job, but teams were looking at him as a potential general manager or director of player personnel. So it's his show. He's the one running the show. We learned that. Matt Groh's going to run college scouting, which is a much better fit for him. So basically, their titles from last year, the jobs are flipping. Last year, Groh was the director of player personnel, and Eliot Wolf was the director of scouting. Now it sounds like Matt Groh's the director of amateur scouting. Pat Stewart, who came over from Carolina last year, who'd been with the Patriots in the past, is the director of pro scouting. And then Eliot Wolf kind of brings the whole thing together. And then they hire Alonzo Highsmith from Miami, which is a hire I love. First off, certified badass. Played for the U back when that meant something. Was a boxer. 3rd overall pick in the NFL draft. Like, awesome. And he's been in a ton of different situations. He's worked at the college level. He's worked at the pro level. He's worked for good teams. He's worked for rebuilding teams. Like, he's going to add a valuable voice. And I think he's just kind of a roving advisor. And he's worked with Wolf before in Green Bay. And that's front office. And honestly, if you told me the plan was to mostly stay internal, that's probably about right. That's probably what it should look like.
Yeah. And I think what you mentioned Wolf's resume.
Yeah.
And I had to double check. I'm not really sure, but he took over in Green Bay, director of player personnel, whatever it was, whatever his title was, in 2008, I believe it was. And when he took over, they were a 6-10 team. A year later, they were 11-5. Year after that, they won the Super Bowl. And a lot of these guys were around Green Bay during those years, the Aaron Rodgers years or whatever. And one thing they were never short on was talent.
Right.
those early, the end of Favre's run and the beginning of Aaron Rodgers' run, those teams, those Packers teams had talent. Their receivers, they had a stable of receivers. You had the A.J. Hawks and was it Clay Matthews, B.J. Raji from B.C.
Oh, I love B.J. Raji back in the day.
Yeah, I mean, they were loaded, man. The defensive end was the Campman. They had a lot of guys that had talent on their team on both sides.
Yeah.
They was able to run the football. They was throwing, about their passing game, but they were a good tight ends team. They had everything, corners. They were just a loaded team, and they had a lot of talent. And yes, Aaron Rodgers, I don't know. You heard about him being upset that they let go of some of those guys that were his QB coaches and a lot of guys the Patriots brought in. But those guys know what they're doing. They were a part of a winning situation in Green Bay. And we can't give the Packers credit for how they built that team. And with these guys when were in place, how they built the personnel, how they built that roster, and how they did things and say they did things right. And then when these guys get to New England, be like, well, I don't know. They don't know what they're doing, bringing these guys in. Like, well, these guys have a track record. They have a history of being pretty good at their job. So I'm happy that they're bringing these guys in. You kind of can not get a sense of their identity, but you see their plan, you see what they're doing. They're bringing in familiar faces that they've succeeded with in the past, and I can't be mad at that at all. And I'm kind of excited about and see which way it's going.
All right, so break it all down for me, Cerrone. We've talked about the coaching staff and still a couple important spots to fill there. Wide receivers coach, chief among them, but we got a good idea what's building there. We've got this front office. Eliot Wolf's in charge. How do you see this offseason going now that we know who's driving the bus?
Oh man, I think they're going to address spots that people weren't really focused on a lot. I can see them making a bigger move when it comes to tight ends. I don't know if it's through the draft, free agency. I think the emphasis on the offensive line is going to be there. Seeing some of the guys they brought in, you've seen some of the reports. I'm pretty sure you mentioned it as well. You know, them leaning more to getting that left tackle early in the draft than we thought. Being able to run the football. I want to see them get a younger running back in. Now that okay, it seems like you want to run the ball. I want to see some younger legs in there. Again, through free agency, draft, or whatever. I mean, I would love to get a Saquon Barkley. That'd be so great. But no, I don't think that's going to happen. But I think they're going to toward running the football and being really strong up front and in the trenches on both sides. I think they're going to play more of an old school style of football, whereas everybody wants a Shanahan guy and a Shanahan style. But I think they're not going in the copycat direction, and they're trying to do their own thing and do it a little more of an old school way. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to go when it comes draft time.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like work with me here. When you say old school, I kind of look at their offense and I wonder. So some people might call what Detroit does old school because Detroit still uses a fullback in Detroit.
Yeah, tight ends.
You know, built from the lineup, big on tight ends, right? But what it really is kind of because Brian Johnson came from that West Coast Shanahan tree. It's really a smash mouth version of what that offense is.
Yeah. And
Alex Van Pelt's not going to run the Ben Johnson offense.
Mm-hmm.
But it's going to look like cosmetically, I think, like you said, old school, but there's going to be some modern wrinkles off of that. But the big thing to me is, like you said, smash mouth football. They're going to be a physical team. They're going to want to win in the trenches. And it's underrated in today's game. Nobody wants to talk about the trenches. Everybody wants to talk about weapons. And look, it's not to say they don't need receivers. Right, exactly. And I think you look at the Super Bowl today is a perfect example. The Chiefs they won in 19. They had a decent offensive line. They also got helped by Kyle Shanahan shooting himself in the foot. They go back in 20. And do you remember the pressure Mahomes was under by the Bucs in that game?
Yeah.
And what do? They turn it around. They invest in the offensive line. You could argue they invested too much and let the wide receivers fall apart, yet here they are. And you look at the Niners, and we talked a little bit about this last week. Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey was a trade, Kittle. These guys are not first-round picks. Their first-round picks are playing up front, either on the offensive or defensive line. They win in the trenches. Their big move at the deadline was to go out and get Chase Young, a defensive lineman. Winning at the line of scrimmage still matters. It still plays. And I do agree with you. It does. I think figuring out the quarterback position is going to be a big part of it. Mm-hmm. Maybe the biggest part because that's just the NFL. It's football. Yes. It's the quarterback.
Yep.
But I think on top of that, they're going to put a focus into reestablishing the Patriots as a team that dominates the offensive line of scrimmage, the line of scrimmage on offense and defense, because that's what they were for so long.
And just real quick, I know you got a break here. Just look at the last four teams that were left.
Yep, exactly.
They run the football, strong offensive lines. They utilize the tight ends. They don't, and they dominate in the trenches on both sides of the football. Niners to shut you down on their end in the trenches. The Kansas City Chiefs defense is probably carrying them right now. You know, with what they're doing up front.
Right.
We all knew what Baltimore was all about, and because they didn't lean on their strength in the trenches is probably why they lost. And Detroit Lions, they ran the football, young tight end, young running back. They all played. Like you said, it's not an old school football, but it is in today's NFL. It's about as old school as you get. And I think that's the direction the Patriots are going in. Tight ends, running game, dominant in the trenches, and a team that punches you in the mouth defensively. Now you just need talent. You still need talent, but the quarterback, like you said, is the engine that's going to drive the whole thing. But I think that's the direction they're going in.